I'm Claire Evans, 32, and I built my career from scratch while juggling two jobs and night school. For years, I supported my boyfriend emotionally, financially, and even professionally, helping him land roles he wasn't qualified for because I believed in his potential. But when he told me, "You're lucky anyone would date you," while I was getting engaged to someone who actually respected me, I made a choice that changed the course of everything. Have you ever poured yourself into someone who made you feel small the second they didn't need you anymore? If that hits close to home, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before we dive into what really happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to walk away from someone who took you for granted, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about setting boundaries and moving forward without looking back. Because what came next caught even him off guard. I met Daniel my last year of college, during a group project for a marketing capstone. He showed up late to the first meeting but somehow left early with half the room laughing. That was the kind of guy he was: easy charm, casual confidence, always managing to get credit without doing too much. I remember thinking, he'll be dangerous in a boardroom someday. I didn't mean it as a compliment, but I also didn't mean it as a warning. Not yet. At the time, I was working two part-time jobs and applying for internships I couldn't afford to take. Daniel, meanwhile, always seemed to land somewhere soft. He said things like, "I don't stress about money, I attract it, and the universe rewards the bold." I didn't believe in that, but I believed in effort. I figured if he had that kind of mindset and I had my work ethic, we'd be unstoppable. We started dating the last semester. It wasn't fireworks, it was convenient, familiar. He made me laugh when I needed it, and I helped him study when he didn't want to fail. I wouldn't say it was love right away, but it felt like momentum, like we were going somewhere together. After graduation, I got a full-time offer at the mid-sized firm I'd interned with. Entry level, not glamorous, but steady. Daniel didn't have anything lined up. He said he was waiting on a few things to click. I offered to let him stay with me for a few weeks while he figured it out. That turned into 6 months. Then a lease. Rent was $1,450 a month. I paid $10 of it. He Venmo'd me $150 here and there when he had it. Sometimes he picked up groceries or cooked on Sundays. He always made it sound even. Like, "Hey, I bought the olive oil this week, so we're good, right?" I didn't push. I thought maybe once he got a stable job, it would even out. My boss was hiring a junior analyst. Nothing flashy, basic spreadsheets, some outreach, some research. I mentioned it to Daniel. He said, "Maybe I'll apply, just for fun." He didn't have the experience, not even close. But he asked me to look over his resume. I ended up rewriting most of it, then rehearsing interview answers with him for 3 nights in a row. He got the job. I was proud. A little surprised, but proud. He started telling people he crushed the interview and that the company had really seen his potential. He never mentioned my name. Not once. I remember overhearing him on a Zoom call with a friend saying, they were lucky to find me when they did. Right place, right time. I was in the kitchen, 3 feet away. Still, I didn't say anything. I told myself it didn't matter who got credit. What mattered was that we were both working, finally on stable ground. I thought it would balance out eventually. The next few years were quiet in some ways. We fell into routines. He got promoted faster than I expected. He was good with people, clients liked him. He had a way of making bad news sound like opportunity. My own work stayed steady. I moved departments once, got better at my job. Nothing spectacular, just consistent. We talked about getting married, but only vaguely. He said things like, "Once we've really made it," or "Let's take that Bali trip first." It always felt just out of reach, like something we'd circle back to when we were better versions of ourselves. I bought a car, used, practical. Daniel borrowed it half the time because he didn't want to lease anything until the market was right. He started hanging out more with some of the senior guys from work. They had money, or at least liked to act like it. Expensive watches, wine clubs, that kind of thing. He'd come home with stories, who embarrassed themselves at lunch, who was getting divorced, who was definitely cheating. Sometimes he talked about their wives like they were assets. She's gorgeous and she cooks. Total win. Or, she doesn't work but she handles his calendar. Fair trade. I didn't like the way he talked about people, especially women, but I let it slide. I thought maybe he was just mimicking the culture around him, trying to fit in. I kept telling myself it was a phase. That we'd level out again. We didn't fight much, but when we did, it always ended the same way. Him going cold, me apologizing. He never yelled. He just made silence feel like punishment. If I pushed too hard, he'd say things like, "Do you always have to ruin a good night?" Or, "You take everything so personally." It wore me down. I started second-guessing myself at work. Then, second-guessing my instincts in general. I stopped bringing up things that bothered me. It didn't seem worth it. I convinced myself we were still in a solid place. That a relationship doesn't have to be perfect to be functional. That maybe I was being too sensitive. There was a moment, about 2 years in, that should have told me everything. We were at a friend's wedding, sitting at a table with a couple who'd just gotten engaged. They were giddy, passing the ring around, telling the story of how he proposed at a vineyard in Sonoma. When someone asked Daniel if we were thinking about it, he laughed and said, "She wants to lock me down, but I'm holding out for someone with fewer opinions." He was half drunk. The table laughed awkwardly. I laughed too, because I didn't know what else to do. Later that night, I asked him about it. He said, "It was a joke. Don't be dramatic." I nodded. I went to bed early. He stayed up with the groomsmen. I could list 100 little moments like that. Quiet dismissals, forgotten promises, things I paid for without discussion. But none of them felt big enough to leave over. Not at the time. I kept thinking, we've been through too much to quit now. The truth was, I had built a version of my life around him, and I was too tired to imagine something else. Until I met Mark. But that part comes later. For now, what matters is this. I thought Daniel and I were a team. I thought we were growing together. But he was growing in one direction, and I was just making sure the rent got paid. Daniel's first promotion came about a year into his job. It was a small step, junior to mid-level, but he treated it like a coronation. He came home with a bottle of champagne and said we needed to celebrate. I congratulated him, of course. He had worked hard, at least in the visible ways. But I also noticed he didn't thank me. Not even a casual, "We did it." I thought maybe he'd forgotten in the excitement. I let it go. That's how it started, small things, easy to ignore. He started staying later at work, coming home drained. "It's just a grind right now," he'd say, dropping his bag on the floor and scrolling through his phone while I finished whatever dinner I'd made. I'd ask about his day and get one-word answers. Then he'd ask, "What did you even do today?" As if it was all light lifting. We still lived together, but the conversations got shorter. The silences longer. I'd try to plan things, dinners, weekend hikes, a movie night, and he'd say he was swamped or too tired, or that I was trying too hard to control the schedule. I stopped trying. At some point, he started making comments. Not full-blown insults, just little barbs dressed as jokes. "You're wearing that to dinner?" Or, "No offense, but your friend Rachel is exhausting." One day, I made a presentation I was proud of and mentioned it over lunch. He shrugged and said, "That's cute." I'd bring something up, maybe how I was thinking of asking for a raise or switching teams, and he'd respond with something like, "Sure, babe. Just don't burn bridges." "You're not exactly irreplaceable." He'd say it with a smirk, like it was a punchline, but the message was always clear. He started spending more time with coworkers outside of work. That part didn't bother me at first. He said it was for culture building and getting in good with the senior guys. But then I noticed he only ever mentioned the same names. A couple of the younger women from his department, and a few times, He'd get home after midnight and be weirdly defensive before I even said anything. "You don't trust me anymore?" he said once, after I asked how the drinks went. "I'm not doing anything wrong, you're just paranoid." Then he added, "Honestly, it's kind of a turn-off when you act like that." I didn't answer. I just cleared the dishes. He started following women on Instagram who all looked the same. High gloss, curated, impossibly filtered. Bikini shots in Capri. Lounge sets in LA. I don't remember when I said something about it. Probably the fifth or sixth time I saw him liking a post in real time. But I do remember how he answered. "Why are you checking up on me?" he said, not even looking up from his phone. "You're not exactly competition." That one stuck with me. Not because it was harsh, though it was, but because he said it like a fact. Not to hurt me, just to end the conversation. Like he really didn't think I had the right to ask. I started pulling back a little after that, not enough to break things off, just enough to protect myself. I stopped telling him about work wins. I stopped trying to make plans. I let him exist in his own orbit and stopped trying to keep pace. It was around this time that Mark started noticing me at work. Mark was a senior executive at the firm where I'd been for almost 4 years. He wasn't flashy, just the kind of person who always paid attention. He remembered names. He read reports. He asked questions. One afternoon, I presented on a client engagement we'd wrapped early and under budget. After the meeting, he stopped me in the hallway and said, "That was solid. You should be leading more of those." I told Daniel that night. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't even ask what the project was. He just said, "Guess I should start watching my back." I laughed, thinking he was joking. But when I looked over, he wasn't smiling. Mark and I didn't become close right away. It was slow, professional, respectful. He invited me to sit in on a few larger meetings. Said he wanted more people who could think across functions. I said yes. I didn't need Daniel's permission, but I still mentioned it out of courtesy. He barely reacted, just nodded and said, "Mark seems like one of those guys who thinks he's smarter than everyone." That wasn't true. Mark was just normal. Smart, yes. But more than that, present. He asked follow-up questions. He gave credit where it was due. And he didn't talk over people, which I realized had become rare in my world. The more time I spent working near him, the more uncomfortable I became with how Daniel acted around me in public. There was this moment at Daniel's company's summer rooftop mixer, where I was talking to someone from HR about a nonprofit I'd been volunteering with. She asked if I worked in community outreach, and I said no, but I'd always found it meaningful. Daniel cut in and said, "She means she writes donation emails. It's not like she runs the place." The woman looked confused. I smiled and changed the subject. Later that night, I asked why he said that. "I was just being real," he said. "You exaggerate sometimes. It's harmless." I stopped inviting him to work events after that. I think he noticed, but he never asked why. There was one more moment that stayed with me. Another office party, this one near the holidays. I was standing behind Daniel while he talked to 2 of his coworkers. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, just waiting for the right moment to say hi. One of them asked if I was his girlfriend. He laughed and said, "She's not exactly my type, but she's reliable." That was it. One sentence. I didn't say anything at the time. I don't think he even knew I heard. I went home early that night. I told him I was tired. He didn't come with me. It's strange how things accumulate. No single moment pushed me to leave. But each time something like that happened, it chipped away at something I couldn't quite name. I started to feel like a placeholder. Like he was just waiting for something better to come along, and I was there to cover the gaps until it did. The contrast between how Mark treated people and how Daniel treated me got harder to ignore. One day, I was in a meeting where Mark interrupted himself mid-sentence to acknowledge an intern's idea. That same evening, Daniel told me I talk too much when I explain things. I remember thinking, I didn't change. So why do I feel so small now? Looking back, those were the early signs. Not of a breakup. Of something else. A shift in gravity. A sense that what I'd built with Daniel wasn't just uneven, it was unrecognized, unreciprocated, and eventually unsustainable. We had a reservation at a little bistro I liked. Nothing fancy, just good food and quiet lighting. It was supposed to be a small celebration. I'd landed a cross-functional leadership project at work, the first real recognition I'd had outside my own team. I told Daniel 2 days earlier. He said, "Nice. That's the one with the travel stipend, right?" I said yes. He nodded, and that was it. No hug, no follow-up questions. Still, I booked the dinner. I didn't expect enthusiasm, but I thought he'd show up. An hour before the reservation, he texted, "Crazy day, pushing late. Rain check?" No call, no explanation. I stared at the message and felt that old familiar pull. Should I push back or just let it go? I let it go. I ordered takeout, opened my laptop, and tried to distract myself. Around 9:30, I checked Instagram without thinking. A mutual friend had posted a group photo, people from Daniel's work, all smiles at some rooftop lounge. He was in the middle, arm around a woman I didn't recognize. She had her head on his shoulder, and his drink was raised in a half toast. I looked at the timestamp, posted 5 minutes ago. He didn't even try to hide it. No team dinner, no last-minute work thing. Just a rooftop, a drink, and someone else's skin against his. I didn't message him. I didn't even screenshot it. I just sat there holding my phone, thinking how strange it was that something could hurt and feel predictable at the same time. He came home late that night, maybe around 2. I was still awake, sitting in bed with the light off. I didn't say anything when he walked in. He didn't notice I was up. He dropped his keys on the dresser, kicked off his shoes, and muttered something about Uber surge pricing. Then he stood in the doorway for a second, swaying a little, and said, "You're lucky anyone would date you. No one else would put up with you." He said it like a fact. Not angry, not heated, just dismissive. Like he was listing reasons we were still together. He didn't wait for a reaction. He just walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower. I stood up, walked to the closet, and packed a bag. Jeans, a couple work outfits, my laptop, a charger. I left my toiletries. I left everything else. When I zipped the bag, the sound echoed in the room. He didn't come out. I left the keys on the kitchen counter and walked out the door. It was close to 3 by the time I got to Rachel's. She opened the door in a sweatshirt and no makeup, and I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there holding my bag like it wasn't heavy. She stepped aside, let me in, and said, "You can take the couch, sheets are clean." That was it. No questions, no analysis, just a safe place to land. Daniel didn't call. He didn't text. Not that night, not the next day, not that week. I went back to the apartment once while he was at work, packed the rest of my things into a few boxes, and took them to a short-term rental near the office. He must have seen the closet half empty, but I never heard from him. Not even a what happened. It was like I had evaporated. I told HR I needed a few days to handle personal matters. They didn't ask. I worked remotely for a bit, kept my head down, and started looking at other apartments. A coworker mentioned a vacancy in her building. Quiet, near a park. Rent a little high but manageable. I signed the lease 3 days later. I changed my address. I updated my direct deposit. I changed the emergency contact on my HR file from Daniel's number back to my sister's. He never noticed. At work, I kept my schedule full. I took on the new project and flew out to lead the kickoff in Atlanta. Mark was there too, quietly supportive, never invasive. He let me take the lead and stayed after the meeting to give me detailed, thoughtful feedback. That week, while I was in a hotel room reviewing slide decks, Daniel posted a photo of himself at a concert. Same woman from the rooftop. Caption said, "Leveling up." No tags, no location. Just that. I stared at it for a minute, then closed the app and turned off my phone. The next month, he deleted our photos, every single one. Trips, holidays, birthdays, gone. As if none of it had ever happened. He didn't block me, didn't even unfollow. Just cleared the slate. Rachel said that was a good thing. Now you don't have to see reminders, she told me. But it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like erasure. Like I'd spent 4 years in a story someone else decided wasn't worth keeping. By the second month, I stopped checking his feed. By the third, I'd gone a full week without thinking about him. Mark and I kept working together. He never asked about my personal life. But sometimes we'd stay back after meetings and talk about things adjacent to it. Work-life balance, the cost of burnout, why certain people coast while others grind. He said once, "The smartest people I know don't speak the loudest. They just move differently." I remember thinking, I want to be around more people like that. Daniel and I didn't speak for 4 months. Not a word. No closure, no postmortem, no final argument. When people asked if I was still with him, I said, "Not anymore." If they asked what happened, I said, "We grew apart." It wasn't a lie, just a cleaner version. By then, I had built a new routine. Gym early, emails over coffee. I kept my weekends quiet. Long walks, dinner with friends, catch-up calls with family. The apartment was small, but it was mine. No leftovers in the fridge I didn't remember buying. No laundry that wasn't mine. No second toothbrush I didn't want to look at. He didn't reach out, not even once. Not when I moved. Not when I changed my number. Not when the new job title went live on LinkedIn. I thought that would be the end of it. I didn't expect the text. I didn't expect it to come when it did. But when it did, months later, out of nowhere, it was exactly the same line he'd used before. And this time, I wasn't alone. The first 2 weeks after I left, I barely spoke. Rachel gave me space, which I appreciated. She let me take over her living room without fuss. No pressure to talk, no unsolicited advice. She just made sure there was coffee in the morning and something to eat in the fridge. That was enough. Sometimes I'd wake up before sunrise and just sit in silence, scrolling through emails like it mattered. I wasn't sad, exactly. It was more like I'd been underwater without realizing it. And now, suddenly, I could breathe again. But I didn't know what to do with the air. One morning, Rachel walked into the kitchen while I was staring at the toaster, and she said, "You know he's where he is because of you, right?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She went on, "That job, that promotion, the connections. You handed all of that to him, and he never said thank you. Not once." She wasn't wrong, but I didn't want to think of it that way. It made me feel stupid. Like I'd spent years investing in someone who was never going to pay it back. Not in kindness, not in loyalty, not in anything real. I spent another week on Rachel's couch before I found a place of my own. It was smaller than the apartment Daniel and I shared, but it was clean and light and quiet. I bought furniture off Facebook Marketplace and built it myself, piece by piece, in the evenings after work. I felt ridiculous every time I looked at the tiny dining table, but it was mine. That mattered. At the office, I didn't talk about the breakup. People asked how I was, and I just said, "Busy," which was true. I buried myself in work. I joined every cross-team initiative I could. If there was a gap in leadership, I stepped into it. If there was a meeting no one wanted to lead, I offered. That's how I ended up working more closely with Mark. He wasn't my direct supervisor, but he had started overseeing a few of the interdepartmental projects I was involved in. The first time we spoke one-on-one, it was after a presentation I gave to the executive team. Nothing fancy, just a quarterly report with recommendations, but I had put real thought into it. Afterwards, he came by my desk and said, "You made people pay attention. Not just listen, actually pay attention." That was the first compliment I'd gotten at work that didn't feel transactional. Mark wasn't overly warm, but he was present. He remembered things. If I said I was prepping for a big meeting, he'd check in afterwards and ask how it went. If I flagged a concern in a report, he'd ask follow-up questions. He didn't hover. He didn't micromanage. He just noticed. We started collaborating more closely. He looped me into strategy discussions that weren't technically part of my job, but he said he trusted my judgment. I stopped double-checking my phrasing in emails. I stopped apologizing for speaking first in meetings. One afternoon, he asked if I wanted to co-lead a new initiative that spanned multiple departments. I said yes without thinking. It wasn't until after the meeting that I realized the team would include Daniel. I didn't say anything. There was no reason to. Mark didn't know about my history with Daniel, and I didn't see any value in making it a thing. When the project launched, I kept everything professional. I never spoke to Daniel directly unless I had to, and when I did, I kept it short, task-focused. I could tell he was surprised to see me on those calls, but he didn't acknowledge it. He just pretended like we'd never shared an apartment, a life, 4 years. Mark never brought him up. Not once. I'm still not sure if he noticed the tension or just chose not to mention it. Either way, I appreciated the silence. I started to realize, slowly, how different it felt to work around people who respected me. Mark never cut me off in meetings. He never questioned my qualifications. He never made little digs or left me out of the loop just to prove a point. There were no games, no passive-aggressive comments, no long silences meant to wear me down. It was just work, just progress, just collaboration. I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like I had to shrink to keep the peace. One night, a few months into the project, I stayed late to finish a presentation. Mark was still in the office, reviewing something across the hall. When I wrapped up, I passed by his door to say goodnight. He looked up and said, "You don't have to stay this late, you know." I smiled and said, "I wanted to get it right." He nodded. "You always do." It was a small moment, but it stayed with me. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late at the old apartment, finishing Daniel's job applications, editing his cover letters, building spreadsheets for his job prep. Not once did he say I did anything right, just that it was fine or decent or enough. Mark didn't flatter, he didn't overpraise, but when he said something, I believed it. That winter, I got my own team. It wasn't a formal promotion, but it was a shift. Mark put me in charge of an initiative with direct reports and a healthy budget. He didn't hold my hand. He just gave me the tools and let me lead. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't need to. We still hadn't spoken. I started seeing changes in how people talked to me around the office. More deference, more inclusion. My name started coming up in rooms I hadn't even entered. Not because I asked, but because my work was making its way there on its own. Mark and I still kept things professional, but there was a growing comfort. We started walking out together sometimes after late meetings. He'd ask about my weekend plans, or if I'd tried a new lunch spot in the area. It never crossed a line, but it felt easy. There was one evening, early spring, where we ended up grabbing coffee after work. Unplanned. Just 2 people trying to wake up before their next meeting. We talked about nothing in particular. Travel, podcasts, why certain people lose their sense of curiosity after 30. Then, almost casually, he asked if I'd ever considered leaving the company. I said I'd thought about it once, during a rough year, but not anymore. He said, "Good, I'd hate to lose you." And for the first time in years, I believed someone meant it, not because I was useful, but because I mattered. At some point, I stopped thinking about Daniel altogether. He became background noise, a name in an inbox, a face in a Zoom square. And that was enough for me, until the text came in, out of nowhere. 4 months of silence, and then, "You're lucky anyone would date you." Same words, same smug rhythm. But this time, everything was different. Because this time, I wasn't in his shadow. I wasn't waiting for recognition. And I wasn't alone. Mark and I didn't start dating while we worked together. Not officially. There was a line we both respected, unspoken but firm. We were careful. Friendly, yes. Close, maybe. But always appropriate. He never pushed. I never hinted. It wasn't calculated. We were just aligned. It started after he announced he was leaving the company. He'd been offered a role at a larger firm, something global with more strategic control. I congratulated him like everyone else, firm handshake, polite smile. But when the announcement went out over email, he stopped by my desk and said, "I'll miss working with you." That was the first time I let myself think about it differently. He left a few weeks later. We didn't talk during that stretch. I figured that was that. A good chapter. A professional one. I even sent him a LinkedIn message saying thanks for everything, and he replied, "Likewise, you're one of the best I've worked with." Then, 3 months later, he texted, not about work, just a simple, "Are you still the one who knows the best coffee spots downtown?" I said I was. He asked if I wanted to prove it. I said yes. That first coffee wasn't a date, but the second was. And after that, things moved in the way they do when there's no resistance. No negotiation. No performance. Just two people who already knew each other at their best and worst, without the romance as a filter. Mark didn't try to impress me. He didn't try to fix me. He just showed up. Consistently. Kindly. He remembered the name of the bakery I liked. He asked about my deadlines. When I talked, he listened. And when I was quiet, he never asked me to fill the space. We kept it private for a long time. Not because we were hiding, but because we didn't need anyone else's input. We didn't post. We didn't over-explain. It was calm and intact, and ours. About a year after our first official date, he proposed. It wasn't a spectacle. No flash mob, no drones. Just us on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, sitting by the window at his place. He didn't even kneel. He said, "I know what this is. I'm not going to waste time pretending I don't." I said yes without thinking. There wasn't anything to think about. Later that day, we told a few close friends. My sister, Rachel. No big announcement. Just a few quiet phone calls, and a bottle of something cold to mark the occasion. The next morning, I was walking to the kitchen with my phone in my hand when I saw it. Daniel's name. A message preview. Same number he'd always had. I hadn't blocked him. Mostly because I hadn't thought about him in so long. It didn't seem necessary. I opened the message. It was short. One sentence. Same one he'd thrown at me the night I left. "You're lucky anyone would date you." No context, no follow-up. Just that. Like he'd been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment to hurl it again. I stared at the screen for a second. Not because I was upset, but because it was so predictable. After all that time, after everything that had changed, that was still the only card he had to play. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I opened the message thread with Mark, forwarded the text, added one line, "Honey, look what your employee sent me." That was it. Mark didn't text back. He didn't call. He didn't ask questions. But I saw the read receipt. I saw the timestamp. And more importantly, I saw him that morning when he walked into the kitchen, phone in hand, and set it down face down on the counter. Calm. Focused. Not a single word about it. He made eggs like he always did. Asked if I wanted to try a new hiking trail that weekend. Nothing changed. But the stillness was different. Measured. The kind that comes when someone's already decided what happens next. He didn't say a thing about Daniel. Not that day, not the next. And I didn't ask. That week, Daniel missed 2 internal meetings. I only found out because an old coworker texted me. "Your ex seems off his game lately. Trouble in paradise?" I didn't reply. By Friday, word started circling that Daniel had been pulled from a major client account. Nothing official, just whispers. Then, the following Monday, a calendar hold went out. Mark had scheduled one-on-one meetings with department leads across 2 teams. No reason given. A few days later, someone mentioned that HR had gotten involved. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need the details. I wasn't looking for revenge. This wasn't about retaliation. This was about standards. Mark had always made it clear, on and off the record, that disrespect, especially toward women, was a line, a real one. Not just the kind companies put in their mission statements. Whatever conversation happened behind closed doors, I wasn't a part of it. I never asked to be. I did my job. I made dinner reservations. I reviewed our wedding venue options. I sent thank you cards to friends who'd congratulated us. Daniel never texted again. Not to follow up. Not to apologize. Eventually, his name disappeared from the company directory. Quietly. Without an announcement. I don't know if he quit or if he was asked to leave. I don't know if he thought he could outrun the consequences, or if he finally understood them. I don't care. What mattered was that I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to argue my worth. I didn't have to explain why a message like that, sent unprovoked, years after the fact, wasn't just petty, it was hostile. I just had to let the right person see it. And trust that he'd act accordingly. Mark never mentioned the message again. Neither did I. But the next weekend, when we were at a coffee shop reviewing invitation mock-ups, he looked at me across the table and said, "You know what I admire most about you?" I looked up. He wasn't smiling. He was just steady. Like always. You never need to yell to make your point. And I knew exactly what he meant. There was no triumph in it. No gloating. Just clarity. The kind you only get when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who never deserved your voice to begin with. Daniel walked into the office that Monday like he always did, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, slightly late but just early enough to keep up the illusion of professionalism. He had a rhythm. That half-confident stride, the clipped greetings, the way he said morning, like it was a performance. I'd seen it so many times before. Back when I used to live in the same apartment. Back when I thought I understood who he really was beneath all that polish. There was a meeting on his calendar that morning. Mandatory. No topic listed. Just a block of time from 10:00 to 10:45, subject line, internal conduct review, attendance required. It was the kind of invite no one ignored and no one talked about. Mark was in the room. So was HR. The door was closed. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I was in my office across town, prepping for a supplier call. I'd forwarded Daniel's message a week earlier, and after that, I stepped back. That wasn't silence, it was intention. There's a difference. Silence is what you fall into when you're afraid. Intention is what you choose when you're done explaining. He tried to deny it. I heard later from someone in the loop. Said the text was taken out of context. That it was a joke. That he was reaching out to an old friend. And that the words weren't meant to offend. HR pulled the phone records. Company-issued devices. It wasn't just the one message. There were more, snide remarks, flippant comments, fragments of conversations that, when pieced together, painted a clear picture. They had the thread. Timestamps. Tone. His own words. Working against him. He didn't get fired. It didn't escalate to that level. No public drama, no announcement, no email that started with, "effective immediately." But by noon, his name was off the client pitch for Q3. By Friday, he wasn't on the call sheet for any cross-functional work. His direct reports were reassigned. His office was moved 2 floors down. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone noticed. There are different kinds of demotions. Some are structural, others are social. This was both. People started treating him differently. Not rude, exactly, just careful. Hesitant. Like they didn't want to be seen standing too close. The way people do when they sense someone's lost favor but don't know how far the fall will go. I didn't ask Mark about it. He didn't volunteer details. There were no winks, no subtle confirmations, just business as usual. But something had shifted. Not between us, around us. The thing about real consequences is that they're rarely loud. They don't arrive with a slam or a headline. They happen in the pauses. In who stops copying you on emails. In the projects that get rerouted. In the glances people give you when they think you're not looking. A few weeks later, I ran into someone from Daniel's old team at a networking mixer. She didn't mention him by name, but she said, "It's interesting who rises and who just stops showing up for the right things. I nodded. I knew what she meant. I never gloated. I didn't need to. Mark and I were deep into wedding planning by then. Guest lists, logistics, deposits. It wasn't the fairy tale version with champagne tastings and boutique tours. It was emails, timelines, spreadsheets. But I liked that. It felt like building something together, piece by piece. Practical. Grounded. One evening, after we'd finalized the catering contract, Mark asked if I wanted to invite anyone from our old company. I said maybe 2 or 3 people. Then he paused and asked, "What about him?" It took me a second to realize he meant Daniel. I looked up and said, "You think he'd want to come?" Mark smiled, just barely. "I think he knows he won't be invited." That was the only time we ever talked about the incident after it happened. Mark never used it to prove a point. Never tried to frame it as an act of loyalty. He didn't need credit. He just did what needed to be done. That said, everything. Daniel didn't disappear right away. He hung on in the company for a few more months, mostly sidelined. He started posting a lot more online. Articles about leadership, confidence, hustle culture. Motivational soundbites like, "Never let others define your worth," and "Your comeback starts when you stop seeking approval." I didn't follow him, but people sent me screenshots. I didn't ask them to. They just did. Then one day, his profile photo changed. A new headshot, slightly overexposed. Caption said, "Excited to announce my next chapter. Building something of my own. More soon." No company name, no details. Just vague momentum. A week later, his LinkedIn title updated to Founder Strategic Growth Advisor. I clicked on the link once. It led to a landing page with stock photos and a contact form. No clients listed. No services described. I closed the tab and didn't check again. Whatever he was trying to start, it wasn't built on anything solid. That's the thing about people like Daniel. They mistake exposure for credibility. They think visibility equals power. But the people who really build things? They're quieter, they don't announce, they just execute. Mark and I moved forward. We settled into a rhythm that felt nothing like survival. I stopped bracing for criticism. I stopped editing myself mid-sentence. There was nothing to prove, nothing to earn. Just mutual respect, day after day. Every once in a while, I'd catch myself wondering if Daniel regretted it. If he looked back at the version of his life, where I was still in it, and thought, maybe I got that wrong. But then, I'd stop myself. Because that wasn't the point. The point wasn't whether he felt remorse. It was that I no longer carried the cost of his behavior. That weight was his now, not mine. And that was enough. The email came on a Thursday. Mid-morning. I was between meetings, skimming through my inbox when I saw his name again. It had been quiet since the text. No calls, no DMs. Just silence, the kind that feels deliberate. But there it was. "Hey," was the subject line. I clicked before I could talk myself out of it. It wasn't long. 3 short paragraphs. He said he'd been immature, that he was working on himself, and that he hoped I was happy. He didn't mention Mark by name. Didn't bring up the engagement, the wedding, the demotion. It was vague in the way all non-apologies are, carefully worded to sound like closure without actually giving any. I read it twice. Not because it moved me, but because I was trying to decide whether to delete it or archive it. I didn't do either. I didn't respond either. I didn't feel the need to correct him, or ask why now, or explain the difference between regret and accountability. I didn't feel anything, really. Just a quiet certainty that nothing in that message changed the past, and nothing in my life required his input. But I didn't block him either. Not because I was leaving the door open, just because I didn't need to close it any further. By then, he was already fading from the edges of my professional life. Word got around that he was leaving the company, officially this time. No party, no farewell email. Just an update on the internal dashboard that said he was pursuing new opportunities. 6 months after his demotion, he was gone. I heard from someone in operations that he'd tried launching a consulting group, strategic branding, or maybe executive coaching. The description changed depending on where you looked. He posted a few vague updates. Excited for this next chapter. Helping clients build real impact. No client names, no real examples. Rachel sent me one of his posts with a laughing emoji. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely feels like a single moment. It's not waking up one day and realizing you're fine. It's the slow unfolding of peace. The first morning, you don't brace before checking your phone. The conversation you have without filtering your tone. The weekend that comes and goes without a single memory of who you used to be with. It happens when you're busy building something else. Something stronger. Mark and I were deep into the last stretch of wedding planning by then. We'd chosen a small venue upstate, just immediate family and close friends. No wedding hashtags, no themed favors. Just a clean space, some music, and vows we'd written ourselves. We didn't rehearse them in front of each other. That was the one thing we kept private. I remember thinking how strange it was to enter a commitment with someone and still want to surprise them with words. It felt like a good sign. Every now and then, people would ask if I was nervous. About marriage. About forever. About sharing space with someone again. I always said no. And I meant it. Mark and I didn't operate on emotional debt. We didn't trade apologies for promises. We didn't keep score. When something bothered me, I said so. When he needed space, he took it. There was no punishment for being human. That kind of relationship resets your internal scale. Suddenly, all the things you used to tolerate look different. Not because you're bitter, but because you're clear. I didn't wish Daniel harm. I still don't. I just don't let him near my peace anymore. That's the difference. You don't have to hate someone to walk away from them. You don't even have to prove they were wrong. You just have to protect what's finally whole. I never responded to his email, but I didn't delete it either. It's still there, buried in a folder I rarely check. Not because I need the reminder, but because it's good to know that even when someone finally finds the words, they still may not have earned your attention. And that's okay. We got married on a quiet hillside in Portugal. Not a venue, not really. Just a family-run vineyard with a stone terrace and a view of the valley. Mark had found it through a colleague who'd gone there on sabbatical. No big ceremony. Just us, a few close friends, and the kind of silence you only get when everyone present actually wants to be there. We didn't do speeches. No choreographed first dance. We read our vows after dinner, standing across from each other while the sun started to dip behind the vines. Mine were short. His were too. But every word was deliberate. Nothing performative. Nothing borrowed from Pinterest or a movie script. Afterwards, we stayed for a week. No honeymoon itinerary, no must-see list. Just early mornings with coffee, afternoon walks through nearby towns, dinners that went on for hours. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I was behind on something, like I had to be somewhere else, doing more, proving something. Mark was the same, even in that slower rhythm, present, consistent. He never made me guess what he was thinking. I never had to read between the lines. That was the real luxury, clarity. When we came back, I didn't change my last name. Not for any particular reason. I just didn't feel the need. Mark didn't care either way. He joked that he barely remembered to answer to his own half the time. I stayed at the same job for a while. Eventually, I moved to a new firm, something smaller, more agile, closer to the kind of work I wanted to do. Mark had gone fully independent by then. He took on a handful of advisory roles, split his time between projects and mentoring younger execs. We kept our routines separate. We liked it that way. No constant overlap, no blurred lines. Some weekends, we'd both work from home and barely speak until dinner. Other days, we'd leave notes for each other on the fridge. Small updates, inside jokes, reminders. I never thought boring could feel so secure. Every now and then, someone would ask about our story. How we met, how it started. I'd keep it simple. We used to work together, I'd say. If they pressed, I'd say, it wasn't romantic then, it took time. Only a few people knew the whole arc, Daniel included. I hadn't seen Daniel since he left the company. Not in person anyway, but he came up occasionally. Through mutual contacts, industry news, LinkedIn suggestions. I'd hear bits and pieces, small consulting gigs that didn't pan out, a failed startup he tried launching during a funding boom, a few podcast appearances that fizzled out before the third episode. He tried different angles, branding, leadership, tech mentorship, but nothing stuck. His name stopped showing up in the circles that mattered. I don't think he did anything unethical, just nothing remarkable. He drifted sideways, professionally and personally. People like Daniel need constant attention to stay relevant, and when they lose it, they start spiraling, not in a dramatic way, but quietly. Through overposting, forced reinventions, half-hearted updates that never lead anywhere. I never responded to his email, never reached out, never mentioned him to Mark after the message. Not once. It wasn't secrecy. It was distance. A line that didn't need to be drawn, because it was already obvious to both of us. Sometimes people ask if I regret those years. The 4 years I spent editing Daniel's resumes, managing our bills, defending his decisions, explaining away his behavior. I don't. That version of me was doing her best, loving as hard as she could, believing in someone who never earned it. There's no shame in that. But I also learned the cost. Daniel taught me how dangerous it is to overinvest in someone who doesn't value you. How quickly love turns into labor when you're the only one doing the work. How quiet disrespect can be. How it shows up in forgotten birthdays, canceled dinners, the way someone introduces you as reliable instead of remarkable. Those lessons stuck. The real twist was never that I ended up with his boss. It's that Daniel thought he could text me like nothing had changed. As if time hadn't moved. As if I hadn't. As if I was still within reach. But everything had changed. By the time that message came through, I wasn't the same woman he'd once left waiting at restaurants, explaining his behavior to my friends, doubting myself in dressing rooms after his comments. I was engaged to someone who saw me clearly. I was no longer apologizing for taking up space. I wasn't editing myself to be more palatable. I was building a life that didn't require explanation. I didn't gloat. I didn't send a follow-up. I just forwarded his words to someone who knew exactly how to handle them. And then I went back to my life. That's the thing about growth. It's not loud. It's not even visible most of the time. It's in how you choose not to reply. It's in the people you let in and the ones you let go without ceremony. It's in the calm you protect long after the noise fades. And it's in knowing that not every twist in the story needs your reaction. Some are best left unacknowledged. Because silence, when it's intentional, is its own kind of legacy. Thanks for listening to my story. Have you ever had someone try to come back into your life like nothing happened after they disrespected you? How did you handle it? Drop your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear how you took your power back. And if you believe in quiet comebacks and letting your growth speak for itself, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs the reminder. You don't owe anyone access to your peace.